Welcome back to the series about CS basics with Python. In this lecture, as we discussed in one of the previous lessons, we want to focus on what the terminal is, or a command line interface, or PowerShell as it is called with Windows, for example. Before we want to go in and code some stuff or do some practical tasks and executions, we want to talk about the basics and what the terminal is, what the CLI is, why we need to use it, and what the advantages of using command line interfaces over graphical user interfaces is. So I created this short presentation. We will go over it in just a few minutes to give you the concepts, the basics of what is called human-computer interaction, and then we want to go in and actually do it ourselves so we understand what commands there are, what we can do, and what are the benefits when using command line interfaces instead of the graphical user interface to do Python execution and coding. All right, so let's jump right in. So let me talk about the terminal and the CS basics of human-computer interactions. We need to have some way to tell the computer what it should do, right? So we cannot just tell it, okay, do math or create a Python program to do this and this. We cannot do yet. Maybe there is some way to do it in the future, or there are some code generators where we can just give it some information we want to have and it kind of executes the stuff itself. Maybe there is something like that in the near future, but for now we need to tell our computer exactly what to do. Maybe it reads our brains in just a while with the Neuralink startup of Elon Musk, but yeah, let's wait for that. For now on, we want to have different ways to tell the computer what we can do. So in our case, this is not just, as I said, by simply telling it, okay, do this, do that, in a general fashion, but we need to have some way to give it an input in the form of, I don't know, text, words, maybe gestures, videos, or some movements. And the computer gives us some output. So the computer gives us information back, whether it is some beeping sound, some text, the execution of something, which is, again, just a displaying of what is done in a graphical way so we can see it with our eyes, and kind of different ways. There are a lot of things. For example, with smartwatches, you have the execution and then you have a feedback output with vibrations, for example, or beeping again. And all of them are just ways to tell the computer what to do, and the computer tells you what happened and what the response was. We'll see that a lot in the future lessons, because every single thing we do is kind of back to the basics, back to in and output. Everything we do is always in and output. So let's look at some of the ways we can do in and output. So the types of input are CLI, graphical user interfaces, or natural user interfaces. And you can see the elements here. So the CLI is the most basic way you can do input for a computer, or maybe there are other ways with electrical signals, but in general, for a user, the CLI is the most simple and broken down version of input. The advantages of that is, as you can see, it's very strict, it's very faultable. So if you give it some faulty instructions, it will error, so it will crash basically. It's codified, so you have to do everything with the code or with text inputs, and we will see later on that it's quite complex to start with, but once you get the basic commands in, it's getting pretty simple and it's powerful. That is the most important aspect of it. So there are a lot of things you cannot do in the graphical user interface that you still have access to in the CLI. The graphical user interface is an abstraction of all the features and the complex behavior of an operating system. And an operating system, of course, is something like macOS, Linux, Windows, whatever your choice is. The graphical user interfaces, they are super simple most of the time. So there are more difficult ones, there are simpler ones, but in general, all of them abstract away the complexity in order to make sure that users are able to use a computer instantly after, for example, they buy it. So it's kind of intuitive to use them, or it's taught to be intuitive, and it's very usable. Compared to, for example, the command line interface, it's not that usable, but it's very powerful. So it's always that trade-off. Do we want to have more usability, or do we want to have more power? And it's always kind of this thing where you have to decide whether you choose the other, or whether you choose one or the other, right? The third thing here is the noise, so the natural user interfaces. And those are in discussion for quite a while now. There have been researches done in the past, like 1999. There have already been some research done with I don't know, augmented reality glasses, and even before that. But it's quite processing intensive. But it's only now getting traction with Oculus and all the other companies that are focusing on virtual reality, augmented reality, and this kind of stuff. It is very natural, it's direct and intuitive, and all of these words speak for very, very simple and abstract behavior. So, for example, if I swipe up with my hand, it just does everything that has to be done internally. In the command line interface, I might have to execute like 10 commands in order to move a file somewhere, rename it, and then get a new association or a new link to that file. But in the graphical user interface, or even in natural user interfaces, I don't even have to use a keyboard or mouse in order to do that. So it's all abstracted away. And of course, as I said, we want to focus on the CLIs here, the command line interfaces. So how do command line interfaces look like? You most likely already have seen something like that. It's just a terminal. It's a command line where you can just type code or type text, and this will trigger some behavior. For example, in the element you see here, we will do all the executions later on in the practical part. But here you can see that, for example, you give the computer ls, and it gives you a list of the files that are currently in the directory, so the folder you're currently in with your terminal. You can also traverse the directories as you can do with a with a graphical user interface, and then we can execute more commands like showing text from a file, listing the files of a directory, or installing some dependencies of Python, for example. The graphical user interfaces, as mentioned, are very abstract already, but you can still do powerful things like renaming files, compressing things, depending on what you have installed on your system. Right click on the folders gives you a lot of options, but it's still not the whole bandwidth of functionality your computer or your operating system provides you, because it's just too much for the user. For a general user, all the information you could do with that specific file or folder is just too much. We'll still use that, but we want to focus on the command line terminal in this case. The GUIs, of course, as I said, are even more abstracted, and we don't want to focus on that here. But for example, all the voice assistants, Echo, Alexa, Home, and Siri, and all these voice assistants are already part of the GUI movement, augmented reality as well, and of course, gestures and things like that. All the gesture control things are already part of this GUI movement, or steps toward having a more general, a more natural behavior and control mechanism for technology, right? So let's kind of already finish that concepting part up here, or the concept and basic part up here, and let's switch over to my code editor, terminal, and folder. All right, so what I did is I opened up the terminal, the current folder, and VS Code with the current folder as well. So it doesn't matter which terminal you use, if it's the one in VS Code or the one on your system, but just decide for one and then kind of execute the same commands or follow along with that specific terminal. All right, and before I start now doing some commands here, I want to show you how you can open it on your specific system. So for example, if you're in VS Code, you just need to go to the terminal and then click New Terminal. This will open up just a new terminal window, and if you have several windows open already, you can switch between the terminal windows here with that setting. And this already is everything we have to do for VS Code. For the terminal of your system, it depends on which system you are. So if you're on Linux or on Mac OS, you can search for the terminal with your either Spotlight search or the search on Linux, and I can just type terminal here, terminal, and then I can see the terminal app, and it just opens my terminal window. When your terminal window opens, it has a default size and a default location, which is your home directory. We will look at folders later on, but for now, just make sure to, let me increase the size here a bit. And then I can see that it has a different folder than my terminal right now. So it says terminal, and here it says this tilde. And tilde is the shortcut for my home directory. So if I want to go to the same folder as here, I need to find that folder on my system. And to do that, I can do ls. And ls lists all the folders I have at the moment. And as you can see in my home directory, I have quite a few. So let me go to my desktop. We can do cd, which is change directory, and I can go to the directory of desktop. Okay, what we can do is we can do another ls to see what kind of files we have here. And we have some stuff and Zoa. And I want to move into Zoa because my terminal folder is in there. So let's use change directory again and go to Zoa. And then what I can do with ZSH is I can click the tab button and it will provide me with possible other elements in that folder. So for example, the projects folder and the bits folder. And I will move into the projects folder, hit enter, do it again, hit the tab button, and then we'll go to terminal. And here we can see if I clear the screen now, clear just clears the screen. I'm in the same directory as here. So it says terminal and then git. And here it says terminal and then git. Okay, perfect. So we're now in the same folder. Let me close that because I'm already in the same folder here in my old terminal, and I've already done the setup with Windows here. The last element we want to open is the folder of our terminal, which is the testing directory for me, with our Finder, which is kind of the graphical user interface way to do that. And what we can see in here is that we have a folder and two files. And the two files are a Python file and a txt file. So let me do ls again in the folder. And here you can see that we have the same elements in here, of course, because the graphical user interface is just a way to display the content of that folder. You can see the folder, Python file, and the txt file. And of course, I can do the same with a terminal in our VS Code, so put ls, and we can see the same files. This concludes this terminal lesson and CLI lesson for now. As I said, we will cover more of that in the future, but for now, I think you're all set up. And well, I hope I'll see you around, and make sure to check out the next lessons and subscribe to this channel to not miss any of them. As I've mentioned before, I will add different tasks in the description of this video. I will give you some examples on what you can do, and then you should already be familiar with the basic commands. Of course, you can also read through more of the commands and help yourself to understand a little bit better, find out more commands, more helpful things, and things you can use later on in order to understand everything a little bit better.